In the heart of ancient Greece, where the gods and goddesses walked among mortals, there lived a woman whose beauty was said to rival the splendor of the sunrise. Medusa was not just any woman, she was a priestess of Athena, the goddess of wisdom and warfare. Her beauty was renowned across the land, her allure as captivating as a sunset over the sea. Medusa's hair, once a cascade of golden locks, was the envy of every maiden. Her eyes sparkled like the clearest emeralds, and her skin glowed with an ethereal light. She moved with a grace that seemed almost otherworldly, her presence as enchanting as a whispering breeze. In the temple of Athena, she was revered not only for her physical beauty but for her devotion to the goddess. Her voice, when she sang, was said to bring tears to the eyes of those who heard it. In those sacred halls, Medusa was more than a servant, she was a symbol of purity and divine favor. Her life was a testament to the values of Athena. She lived by the strictest codes of chastity and devotion, her days filled with rituals and prayers. To her followers, she was a living embodiment of the goddess's grace, a bridge between the mortal and the divine. But beneath the surface of this revered figure lay a soul that longed for something beyond the temple walls. Medusa dreamed of seeing the world beyond her sacred sanctuary, of feeling the sun on her face and the wind in her hair. She imagined walking through fields of flowers, basking in the freedom that seemed so distant from her life of strict rituals. Her days were marked by the rhythm of daily ceremonies and prayers, her nights spent in quiet contemplation. She had dedicated her life to Athena, believing that her devotion would ensure her place among the honored. Her beauty, once a gift, had become a symbol of her unyielding commitment to the goddess. Little did she know that this very beauty, so treasured and cherished, would soon become the source of her unimaginable suffering. Medusa's life took a fateful turn the day she ventured beyond the temple's boundaries, driven by a curiosity that had always simmered just below the surface. The outside world was not the place of serene beauty she had imagined. It was wild and untamed, full of dangers and temptations. And yet, there was something exhilarating about it, something that made her heart race with a mix of fear and excitement. One fateful day, as she wandered through the verdant glades of a nearby forest, her beauty caught the eye of a powerful god. Poseidon, the god of the sea, was known for his irresistible charm and fierce nature. His gaze fell upon Medusa, and in that moment, the goddess's cherished priestess became the object of his dark desires. Poseidon's actions were both sudden and brutal. In the sacred temple of Athena, a place where Medusa had felt safe and cherished, her life took a cruel twist. The violation that occurred was not just a physical assault, it was a desecration of everything Medusa had held sacred. Her world, once filled with devotion and purity, was shattered in an instant. Medusa's beauty, once her greatest asset, now became a curse. The goddess she had served so faithfully was outraged by the violation of her sacred space. Athena, known for her wisdom and fairness, was unable to overlook the desecration of her temple. In her anger, she turned her wrath upon Medusa, punishing her for the actions of the god who had wronged her. In the blink of an eye, Medusa's life changed forever. The beauty that had once been her pride became a mark of her downfall. Athena's punishment was as severe as it was tragic. Medusa was transformed from the most beautiful woman in the world into a hideous creature whose gaze could turn any living being to stone. Her once cherished golden hair became a writhing mass of snakes, and her eyes, which had once sparkled with joy, were now filled with the curse of the Gorgon. The transformation was not just physical, it was a complete upheaval of her identity. The priestess who had once been adored and revered was now a figure of fear and horror. Her beauty, which had been her greatest asset, became the symbol of her tragic fall. The isolation and despair that followed were almost too much to bear. Medusa's story is a poignant reminder of the fragility of human fate. A life that had begun in beauty and reverence was abruptly altered by a cruel twist of destiny. The once proud priestess was left to face a world that had turned its back on her, her beauty now a distant memory overshadowed by the curse that had become her reality. Medusa's world shattered on a day that began like any other, a day when the sun shone with innocent brilliance and the temple of Athena stood as a sanctuary of peace. Inside its sacred walls, where prayers were whispered and rituals performed, a sinister shadow loomed unseen. Poseidon, the mighty god of the sea, was drawn to the temple not by reverence, but by a dark and consuming desire. The sea god, whose presence was usually marked by storms and crashing waves, now intruded upon the purity of the temple. His eyes, fierce and unyielding, locked onto Medusa with a hunger that spoke of forbidden intentions. Medusa, amidst her duties, felt a strange chill as she moved through the marble halls. Her every step had once been guided by devotion and grace. Now, her senses were troubled by an unexplainable tension in the air, a disquiet that seemed to pulse with a malevolent force. Unaware of the danger that approached her, she continued her tasks with the solemnity of a sacred duty. As Poseidon entered the temple, the atmosphere seemed to change. The sacred silence was broken by his imposing presence. Medusa's heart quickened, her instincts screaming at her to flee, but the deity's power was overwhelming. The walls of the temple, once a shield of protection, now felt like a prison closing in around her. Poseidon's touch was both commanding and invasive. In an instant, the serene environment of the temple turned into a place of terror. Medusa's cries, once a source of worship and praise, were now swallowed by the darkened air. The god's actions were swift and brutal, a violation that defiled the very essence of what the temple stood for. Medusa's sense of reality fractured. Her body, which had once moved with grace, now felt foreign and powerless against the force that overwhelmed her. The emotional trauma was even more devastating than the physical assault. The temple, once a sacred space of her devotion, had become the scene of her deepest violation. The very place where she had felt safest was now the stage for her unimaginable suffering. When Poseidon left, the temple seemed to retain a whisper of his malevolence, as if the walls themselves were tainted by the cruelty that had transpired. Medusa, left in a state of shock and profound despair, struggled to comprehend what had just occurred. Her mind raced through waves of disbelief and pain, unable to reconcile the purity of her past with the horror of her present. The aftermath of the violation was not just a personal torment, but a profound betrayal of everything Medusa had held sacred. The gods were not mere figures of distant reverence, but had now become agents of her suffering. The goddess Athena, whom Medusa had served with unwavering faith, was now faced with a decision that would alter the course of Medusa's life forever. Athena's reaction was swift and merciless. The goddess could not overlook the desecration of her temple, and though Poseidon's actions were the cause, it was Medusa who faced the brunt of the punishment. The divine wrath was unleashed not on Poseidon, but on Medusa. The once pure priestess was condemned to a fate that would turn her beauty into a weapon of horror. Medusa's transformation into a Gorgon was not just a physical change, it was a complete obliteration of her previous identity. The beauty that had been her pride was now a symbol of her curse. Her hair, once a golden cascade, became a writhing mass of snakes. Her gaze, which had once been a source of admiration, became a deadly force capable of turning anyone who looked upon her to stone. The emotional impact of this curse was devastating. Medusa, who had once been a figure of grace and reverence, was now reduced to a creature of fear and isolation. The very thing that had once been her pride became a source of her torment. Her beauty, which had been a gift, was now a reminder of her deepest suffering and betrayal. In the temple where her suffering began, Medusa's story became one of tragedy and despair. The god who had inflicted the pain was long gone, and the goddess who had once been her protector had turned her into a symbol of horror. Medusa's life, once filled with hope and reverence, was now overshadowed by a curse that defined her very existence. Every corner of the temple, every sacred hall where she had once walked with purpose and grace, now seemed like a cruel reminder of what had been lost. The violation that had begun as a moment of darkness had transformed into a lifelong punishment, forever altering the course of Medusa's life and casting a long shadow over her legacy. Athena, the goddess of wisdom and warfare, was known for her sense of justice and her fierce protection of sacred places. When news of the desecration of her temple reached her, a storm of fury and anguish erupted in the divine halls of Olympus. The sacred space that had been tainted by Poseidon's brutal act was more than just stone and marble to her, it was a reflection of her own purity and sacredness. The violation had shattered not just the temple's sanctity but also Athena's sense of divine order. Athena's reaction was swift and unyielding. The goddess, known for her fairness, faced a dilemma that was both agonizing and complex. The violation had been inflicted upon Medusa, her own priestess, a devoted servant who had dedicated her life to the goddess. But in Athena's eyes, the sanctity of her temple had to be upheld above all else. The law of the divine was clear: no one, not even a cherished servant, could escape the consequences of such a grave offense against sacredness. The goddess descended upon the scene with an aura of seething anger. Her presence, usually a source of guidance and protection, now bore the weight of divine retribution. Athena's gaze, usually filled with wisdom, was now fixed with a steely determination to restore the balance that had been disrupted. The betrayal was not just an offense to her temple but an affront to her very essence. In her wrath, Athena faced a profound struggle between her sense of justice and her compassion. Medusa, who had been a symbol of devotion, now stood as a victim caught in the crossfire of divine anger. The transformation Athena chose for Medusa was not merely punishment but a manifestation of her fury and sorrow. The change that Medusa underwent was both horrific and tragic. Athena transformed the beautiful priestess into a Gorgon, a creature of fear and revulsion. Her once golden hair, the envy of all who saw it, became a mass of writhing snakes. Her eyes, which had sparkled with devotion and warmth, were cursed to become the most terrifying weapon, a gaze that could turn anyone who looked upon her into stone. This transformation was not simply physical, it was a complete upheaval of Medusa's identity. The beauty that had once been Medusa's greatest pride and symbol of her divine favor was now twisted into a mark of horror. The change was a reflection of Athena's anguish and frustration, a way to preserve the sanctity of her temple even at the cost of her own servant's soul. Athena's decision to punish Medusa so severely was driven by a sense of necessity. The goddess was bound by the laws of the divine and the need to maintain order and respect for sacred spaces. The violation of her temple was a breach that could not be overlooked or forgiven, no matter how much Athena might have wished otherwise. The punishment was a stark reminder of the importance of upholding sacredness and the harsh reality of divine justice. The transformation of Medusa into a Gorgon was not just a punishment but a tragic irony. The very beauty that had made Medusa a revered figure became the source of her suffering. Her new form was a cruel twist of fate, a punishment that embodied both her loss and her newfound curse. Athena's wrath, while aimed at restoring balance, resulted in a profound tragedy that would haunt both the mortal and divine realms. Medusa's life after the curse was marked by isolation and despair. The once cherished priestess was now a figure of fear and loathing, forced to live in the shadows, away from the world she had once been a part of. The divine retribution that Athena had deemed necessary left Medusa with a life of loneliness and sorrow, a stark contrast to the reverence she had once known. In her divine realm, Athena would have felt the weight of her decision as well. The goddess's wrath, though intended to restore balance, came with a heavy price, a once beautiful servant condemned to a life of monstrous isolation. The punishment served as a reminder of the delicate balance between justice and compassion, and the heart-wrenching consequences that come when divine laws are set into motion. Medusa's transformation was a nightmarish spectacle, a scene that unfolded with an intensity that was both surreal and horrifying. The goddess Athena, in her fury, cast a spell that twisted Medusa's once beautiful form into something unrecognizable. What had been a figure of grace and beauty became a ghastly creation of myth and terror. As the curse took hold, Medusa's golden hair, which had flowed like a river of light, began to writhe and twist. What was once soft and smooth became a serpentine tangle of living snakes, each one hissing and slithering with a life of its own. The very strands of her hair, which had once been the envy of all who saw her, now sought to bite and strike at any who came near. Her eyes, once filled with warmth and kindness, changed into something far more sinister. They became piercing and cold, able to petrify anyone who met their gaze. The transformation did not merely alter her appearance, but turned her into a being of pure fear. Medusa's eyes, which had once looked upon the world with innocence, were now an instrument of horror and death. The transformation left Medusa with a grotesque visage. Her once smooth and radiant skin was now marred by a hideous texture, her features twisted into a mask of monstrous proportions. Her face, which had once been a source of admiration, now evoked only terror. She could no longer look at her reflection without being overwhelmed by the sight of the horror she had become. The loss of her former self was more than just a physical change. It was a complete erasure of her identity, her past, and everything she had once stood for. Medusa had been a symbol of beauty and purity, revered by all who knew her. Now, she was reduced to a creature of nightmares, a being whose very presence could bring death and destruction. The contrast between her past and present was stark and cruel, a reminder of what had been taken from her. Emotionally, the curse inflicted a devastating blow. Medusa was plunged into a world of isolation and despair. The very qualities that had once defined her, her beauty, her grace, her connection to the divine, were now sources of her torment. Her new form made her a pariah, feared and reviled by all who crossed her path. The solitude of her existence was not just physical, but deeply emotional, a constant reminder of her loss and her curse. In the depths of her isolation, Medusa grappled with her own identity. She was no longer the revered priestess of Athena, but a monstrous figure cursed to live in the shadows. The psychological impact was immense. The woman who had once been celebrated for her beauty was now a symbol of horror. Every moment was a battle against the anguish of knowing that her past life had been irrevocably destroyed. Medusa's emotional torment was compounded by the awareness that her curse was a punishment meant to preserve the sanctity of the temple. The very goddess she had served with devotion had turned her into a figure of dread. This betrayal was not just a physical transformation but an emotional crucifixion, leaving Medusa to confront a reality where she was both victim and monster. The transformation process was not instantaneous, it was a slow, agonizing shift from beauty to beast. Medusa's senses, once attuned to the world with grace and subtlety, were now overwhelmed by the chaotic presence of the serpents that adorned her head. The constant movement of the snakes was a constant reminder of her curse, each hiss and slither a jarring echo of her lost humanity. As the days turned into weeks, the weight of her new form became a physical and emotional burden. The isolation was crushing, her existence confined to the dark recesses of a cave far from the world she had once known. The silence of her surroundings was a stark contrast to the reverent whispers of the temple where she had once served. The solitude was a constant reminder of the isolation imposed by her curse. Medusa's new existence was a never-ending cycle of despair and anger. The transformation had not only altered her appearance, but had also stripped away her sense of self. The once beautiful priestess, who had looked upon the world with hope and reverence, was now a creature of fear, condemned to a life of monstrous isolation. The curse had taken everything from her, the beauty, the grace, and the life she had once cherished. In the darkness of her cave, Medusa was left to grapple with the reality of her existence. The transformation was complete, leaving behind a being who could no longer find solace in her past or hope for a future. The emotional scars were as deep as the physical ones, each moment a painful reminder of what had been lost and the cruelty of her divine punishment. Medusa's exile began with the slow, agonizing realization that her life as she had known it was gone forever. The once resplendent priestess, who had walked among mortals and gods with grace, was now cast into a dark, foreboding cave, far from the world she had cherished. Her new home was a cavernous expanse where shadows reigned and light dared not enter. The entrance to Medusa's new dwelling was a gaping maw on the side of a rugged cliff, concealed by a veil of twisted vines and thorns. Inside, the cave was cold and unwelcoming. Stalactites hung like jagged teeth from the ceiling, and the ground was uneven and harsh. The silence was thick and heavy, broken only by the occasional drip of water from the ceiling, echoing through the oppressive stillness. Medusa's first steps into the cave were a jarring transition from the warmth of her past life. Every step she took was accompanied by the rustling of the snakes that had replaced her once beautiful hair. Each movement was a cruel reminder of her new reality. The serpents hissed and writhed, their presence a constant source of discomfort and unease. The echo of their hissing seemed to amplify the isolation, creating an oppressive atmosphere that closed in around her. In the initial days of her exile, Medusa struggled to cope with her new identity. The beauty that had once been her pride was now a weapon of fear. The reflection she saw in the water pools of the cave was a ghastly, monstrous version of the woman she had once been. Her eyes, capable of turning anyone to stone, were a source of constant horror. Every time she looked at her reflection, she was reminded of her fall from grace, her past life irretrievably lost. The loneliness of the cave was a burden beyond measure. Medusa was cut off from the world she had known, her only companions the serpents that writhed on her head. The vibrant, lively world she had once inhabited was now a distant memory, replaced by the oppressive silence of her new existence. The cave, with its cold and dark expanse, seemed to echo her own sense of abandonment and despair. Each day in the cave was a struggle against despair. Medusa tried to find solace in the solitude, hoping that time would heal the wounds inflicted upon her. Yet, the silence was relentless, amplifying her loneliness and her sense of betrayal. Her days were spent in a monotonous routine of aimless wandering through the cave's labyrinthine passages, her only company the ever-present hiss of the serpents that adorned her head. At night, the cave seemed to close an even tighter, the darkness pressing down on her with an almost tangible weight. The isolation was complete, the silence overwhelming. Medusa's only comfort was the faint glow of bioluminescent fungi that grew in the depths of the cave, casting an eerie light that offered little warmth or solace. The glow was a cruel reminder of the beauty she had once possessed, now a distant and unreachable dream. The psychological toll of her exile was profound. Medusa's mind, once sharp and clear, was now clouded by the constant weight of her curse and the crushing loneliness. The world she had known and loved was gone, replaced by a new reality that offered no hope of redemption. The isolation forced her to confront the full extent of her suffering, her emotions a tangled web of sorrow, anger, and despair. Her attempts to come to terms with her new identity were met with a harsh reality. The cave offered no respite from the pain of her transformation. Every corner, every shadow, seemed to mock her with memories of what had been lost. The beauty that had once defined her was now twisted into a form of horror, and the love and admiration she had once enjoyed were replaced by fear and revulsion. As the years passed, Medusa's isolation became a part of her identity. The cave, once a symbol of her punishment, became her entire world. The weight of her curse and the loneliness of her existence began to merge, creating a reality where hope was a distant and unreachable concept. Her transformation into a Gorgon was not just a physical change, but a complete overhaul of her existence, leaving her trapped in a world where she was both prisoner and monster. Medusa's struggle to cope with her new life was a daily battle against despair. The cave, with its harsh and unyielding environment, mirrored the emotional and psychological torment she experienced. Each day was a reminder of her fall from grace, a continuous cycle of sorrow and isolation that offered no escape. Her past life, with its beauty and reverence, seemed like a cruel joke, a distant memory overshadowed by the darkness of her new reality. In her dark cave, Medusa faced a future that seemed as bleak and unyielding as the stone walls surrounding her. The curse that had transformed her into a Gorgon was a constant presence, a reminder of her lost identity and the cruel fate that had befallen her. The loneliness of her exile was a profound and inescapable reality, shaping her existence into one of eternal isolation and sorrow. The Gorgon's lair was a place of eerie beauty and haunting desolation. Hidden in a dark, remote part of the world, it was a sprawling network of caverns and tunnels that seemed to stretch endlessly into the earth. The air was cold and damp, filled with the constant drip of water from the ceiling. Faint, ghostly light from bioluminescent fungi cast a sickly glow on the walls, illuminating the twisted shapes and shadows that seemed to dance with every movement. Medusa's new home was a cavernous space, vast and dark. The stone walls were rough and uneven, and the floor was littered with the bones of unfortunate creatures who had ventured too close. The cave had become a prison of sorts, with its oppressive darkness and the constant echo of the dripping water. Despite its grim appearance, it was now a place of solace for Medusa, a sanctuary where she could hide from the world that had rejected her. The lair was not empty. Medusa shared it with her sisters, the other Gorgons, Steno and Euryale. They had been transformed alongside her, and their presence was both a comfort and a reminder of their shared fate. Each of them bore the same curse, their once beautiful forms now grotesque and fearsome. Their hair had also turned into snakes, and their eyes had become as deadly as Medusa's. Together, they were a formidable trio, bound by their shared suffering. The relationship between the sisters was complex and evolved over time. At first, there was an unspoken tension. Medusa's arrival in the lair was met with a mixture of sympathy and caution. The sisters had their own struggles and sorrows, and Medusa's presence, marked by her fresh pain and the recentness of her curse, was a reminder of their own anguish. The initial interactions were strained, with each Gorgon coming to terms with their own torment and their new reality. As days turned into months, a tentative bond began to form. The sisters, despite their differences and their own deep-seated grief, found a way to connect through their shared experiences. They began to adapt to their new existence, finding ways to support one another in their collective suffering. Their conversations, often whispered in the darkness, became a source of comfort and understanding. They shared their stories, their fears, and their hopes, finding solace in each other's company. Medusa, though initially isolated, gradually became an integral part of this Gorgon family. Her struggles, though painful, were a common thread that connected her with her sisters. The moments of silence in the cave were often filled with the soft sounds of the Gorgons' shared presence, the rustle of their snake-like hair, the occasional hiss, and the muted whispers of their conversations. The cave, once a symbol of Medusa's punishment, became a place of shared pain and mutual understanding. In the confines of their lair, the Gorgons found ways to adapt and cope with their new lives. They created a semblance of routine to combat the monotony of their existence. They explored the labyrinthine passages of their cave, discovering hidden alcoves and subterranean pools that offered brief moments of respite from the darkness. The bioluminescent fungi, though eerie, provided a faint illumination that helped to stave off the oppressive blackness. Medusa and her sisters also began to develop their own rituals, small acts of defiance against their curse. They would often gather in the central cavern, where the light from the fungi created a dim, eerie glow. Here, they would share stories of their past lives, recounting memories of the world they had lost. These moments, though tinged with sorrow, were also filled with a sense of solidarity. They found strength in their shared experiences and a way to honor their past lives despite the cruel fate that had befallen them. As the seasons changed outside their cave, the Gorgons adapted to the shifting environment of their underground world. The changing patterns of light and darkness in their cave mirrored the passage of time, creating a rhythm that helped them maintain a sense of continuity. The Gorgons became attuned to these subtle changes, using them to mark the passage of days and seasons in a world that was otherwise timeless and unchanging. Despite their evolving relationship, the Gorgons remained isolated from the outside world. The cave was both a sanctuary and a prison, offering protection from those who might seek to harm them while also confining them to a life of solitude. The sisters' existence was a constant reminder of the outside world they could never again be a part of. Their interactions, though filled with understanding and support, were tinged with the knowledge of their eternal separation from the world of light and life. In their dark, hidden lair, Medusa and her sisters created a world of their own, shaped by their shared suffering and their bond as Gorgons. The cave, though a place of darkness and despair, became a symbol of their resilience and their ability to find solace in each other. Their interactions and their adaptation to their new lives were a testament to their strength and their enduring connection despite the harsh reality of their curse. Medusa's lair was no longer a place of isolation but a battleground where her fate intersected with the lives of those who sought her out. Heroes, drawn by the promise of glory or driven by personal quests, ventured into the darkness of her cave, each with their own reasons and hopes. Their encounters with Medusa were marked by drama and desperation, as they faced not just the fearsome Gorgon but also the darkness within themselves. One of the earliest heroes to seek Medusa was Perseus, a young warrior driven by a mission set by King Polydectes. The king's orders were cruel and calculated, aimed at removing Perseus from the throne's path by sending him on a seemingly impossible quest. Medusa was the key to this treacherous plan. Her head was believed to be a powerful weapon. For Perseus, the mission was both a test of his courage and a chance to prove himself, though he was unaware of the full gravity of what lay ahead. The moment Perseus stepped into the Gorgon's lair, he was met with a darkness that seemed to swallow him whole. The air was thick with the chill of the cave, and the faint glow from the bioluminescent fungi cast eerie shadows on the walls. Perseus, armed with a reflective shield and a sword, navigated the labyrinthine passages with a mixture of fear and determination. The serpents on Medusa's head hissed in response to his presence, their movements a constant reminder of the danger he faced. As Perseus ventured deeper, he finally encountered Medusa. The sight was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. Medusa's transformed visage, with her serpentine hair and petrifying gaze, was a stark contrast to the beautiful priestess she had once been. Her eyes, now cold and unforgiving, were a weapon that could turn anyone to stone. Perseus had to rely on his shield to avoid her deadly gaze, using its reflective surface to see her without meeting her eyes directly. The battle that followed was a harrowing struggle. Perseus, using both his shield and his sword, engaged with Medusa in the dark cavern. The cave's oppressive silence was occasionally broken by the clash of steel and the hissing of serpents. Perseus fought with every ounce of his strength, his movements a blur of skill and desperation. Despite his courage, the encounter was fraught with peril. Medusa's monstrous form and the darkness of the cave made every move a calculated risk. As the battle reached its climax, Perseus managed to sever Medusa's head with a swift and decisive strike. The moment was both tragic and triumphant, a culmination of his quest and a cruel reminder of the life that had been lost. Medusa's final moments were marked by a profound sadness, her once beautiful features frozen in an expression of eternal despair. Perseus, though victorious, left the cave with a heavy heart, burdened by the weight of what he had done. Other heroes, driven by their own motives, also sought out Medusa. Some were seeking her head as a trophy, believing it would bring them fame and fortune. Others were driven by personal vendettas or misguided sense of justice. Each hero faced the same dark labyrinth and the same terrifying Gorgon, but their encounters were marked by their own unique struggles and fears. One such hero was a warrior from a distant land, seeking to prove his might and secure a place in the annals of legend. His quest was driven by pride and ambition, and he approached the cave with a bravado that quickly turned to fear. His encounter with Medusa was swift and brutal. The hero, caught off guard by the ferocity of the Gorgon and the treacherous terrain, found himself outmatched. His cries echoed through the cave as he fell victim to Medusa's deadly gaze, turning to stone before his final breath. His demise was a stark reminder of the Gorgon's terrifying power. Another hero, a prince seeking to redeem his family's honor, ventured into the cave with a mix of hope and desperation. His journey was not just a quest for glory but a search for redemption from past mistakes. His encounter with Medusa was marked by a poignant struggle as he fought to overcome his own fears and regrets. The battle was intense, but the prince's resolve was matched only by Medusa's own anguish. In the end, he managed to overcome her, but the victory was bittersweet. The prince left the cave with a heavy heart, having faced not just the Gorgon but also his own inner demons. These encounters were more than mere battles, they were moments of profound tragedy and reflection. Each hero's quest into the dark cave of Medusa was a confrontation with their own fears and desires. The Gorgon, though a fearsome opponent, was also a symbol of loss and suffering. Her presence in the cave was a reminder of the pain and isolation that had become her existence. As the heroes left the cave, their lives were forever changed. The encounters with Medusa were moments of profound impact, shaping their destinies and altering their perceptions. The Gorgon's lair, once a place of darkness and despair, became a crucible where heroes confronted not just a fearsome foe but also their own humanity. Medusa's story was one of tragic transformation and relentless struggle. Each hero who sought her out was met with a darkness that tested their courage and revealed their deepest fears. The battles in the cave were a reflection of the complex interplay between heroism and suffering, a reminder of the profound impact of Medusa's curse and the lives it touched. The cave trembled as Perseus stepped into the heart of Medusa's lair, each step echoing with the weight of what was to come. The darkness seemed to close in around him, the air growing colder and heavier with every movement. The faint, eerie glow from the bioluminescent fungi cast shifting shadows on the walls, adding to the oppressive atmosphere. Perseus's heart pounded in his chest, the gravity of his mission pressing down on him. He had come to this dark place not for glory, but to face a living nightmare. Medusa lay still at the far end of the cavern, her serpentine hair coiled around her, each snake moving with a life of its own. Her eyes, even closed, seemed to hold a cold, menacing power. The once beautiful face of the priestess was now a mask of eternal sorrow and rage. The room was eerily silent, save for the soft hissing of the snakes and the faint drips of water echoing in the cavern's vastness. Perseus held his shield close, its polished surface gleaming faintly in the dim light. The shield was his only defense against Medusa's petrifying gaze. He knew that looking directly at her could mean instant death, so he relied on the reflection from his shield to navigate through the darkness. His sword was ready, its edge gleaming with a deadly promise. He moved cautiously, each step calculated as he approached the motionless Gorgon. His breaths were shallow, each exhale creating a mist in the cold air. The tension in the cavern was palpable, a silent anticipation hanging like a shroud. As Perseus drew closer, he could see the rise and fall of Medusa's chest, a stark reminder that this was not just a monster but a being who once had a life and a story. The silence was broken by the sudden, sharp hiss of Medusa's serpentine hair. Her eyes opened, and Perseus felt a rush of cold fear. The gaze of the Gorgon was more than just a physical threat, it was a symbol of the curse and suffering she had endured. Perseus adjusted his shield, angling it to catch her reflection. The shield's mirrored surface created a distorted image of Medusa, but it was enough to reveal her deadly intent. Medusa's eyes locked onto the shield's reflection, her rage building as she recognized the threat before her. The cavern erupted into chaos. Perseus moved with practiced precision, his sword flashing in the dim light as he aimed for the Gorgon. The battle was a dance of light and shadow, of steel against stone. Medusa's serpents writhed and hissed, a chorus of fury and anguish. Every movement was fraught with danger. Perseus had to stay vigilant, constantly adjusting his shield to avoid Medusa's direct gaze. The air was filled with the sounds of combat, the clash of sword against stone, the hissing of snakes, and the occasional anguished cry of the Gorgon. Perseus's muscles ached with the effort of dodging and striking, his focus solely on the battle at hand. Medusa fought with a fierce desperation, her movements erratic and wild. Her eyes darted towards the shield, trying to catch Perseus off guard. The struggle was intense, with each of them locked in a deadly dance. Perseus's sword found its mark several times, but Medusa's serpents were relentless, striking out at him with venomous fury. The final moments of the battle were a blur of action and emotion. Perseus, driven by a mix of fear and resolve, pressed forward with renewed determination. His strikes became more focused, each swing of his sword a step closer to ending the Gorgon's torment. Medusa, despite her monstrous form, was still a victim of a cruel fate, her every movement a testament to her suffering. As the battle reached its climax, Perseus saw his chance. With a swift and decisive motion, he swung his sword with all his might. The blade cut through the air and found its mark. Medusa's final cry was a mix of pain and sorrow, a sound that echoed through the cavern like a mournful wail. The Gorgon's head fell to the ground, her serpentine hair hissing one last time before falling silent. In the aftermath, the cavern was eerily quiet. Perseus stood over Medusa's lifeless body, the weight of the victory heavy on his shoulders. The battle had been won, but the cost was apparent in the silence that followed. Medusa's once terrifying presence was now just a tragic relic of a curse that had transformed her from a revered figure into a monstrous figure of fear and pity. The final confrontation with Medusa was a moment of intense drama and deep emotion. Perseus had faced not just a fearsome adversary, but the echoes of a tragic story, a tale of beauty lost and a life marred by a cruel fate. The cavern, now silent, held the remains of that story, a reminder of the profound and tragic clash between hero and Gorgon. The silence in the cavern was profound after Medusa's death. The echoes of the battle faded, leaving only the sound of Perseus's heavy breathing and the occasional drip of water from the cave ceiling. The weight of the victory pressed heavily on him, a mix of relief and sorrow. Medusa's once fearsome presence was now just a lifeless relic of a tragic story, and the hero who had come to defeat her was left to face the consequences of his actions. Perseus carefully collected Medusa's severed head, the reality of his victory sinking in. The head, still and silent, was a symbol of the end of Medusa's torment, but also a powerful artifact in its own right. The serpents on her head lay motionless, their deadly hisses now silent. The power of her gaze, which had turned so many to stone, was now contained within the head. Perseus knew that this was no ordinary trophy, it was a weapon of immense power. With the head secured, Perseus began his journey back, the burden of Medusa's death now a part of him. The path was long and fraught with its own challenges. The head, wrapped in protective cloth, was both a prize and a heavy responsibility. The journey was a time of reflection for Perseus, who grappled with the complexity of his victory. The relief of completing his quest was mingled with the weight of the sorrowful reality of Medusa's fate. Upon returning, Perseus presented Medusa's head to King Polydectes. The king, who had orchestrated the quest with ulterior motives, was struck by the sheer power and majesty of the severed head. The gaze that had once petrified now lay in wait, a symbol of ultimate control. Polydectes' reaction was a mix of awe and greed, and he quickly saw the potential of using the head's power to further his own ends. Medusa's head became a powerful weapon, its influence spreading far beyond its initial purpose. In the hands of the king, it was used as a tool of intimidation and control. The sight of the head alone was enough to instill fear and assert dominance. The stories of Medusa's head and its power grew, turning the Gorgon into a symbol of both terror and caution. In the mythological world, the impact of Medusa's death and her head's use was profound. The head was eventually given to the goddess Athena, who placed it on her shield, the Aegis. The shield, now bearing the Gorgon's head, became a symbol of divine protection and power. Medusa's gaze, once a curse, was now a tool of divine authority. Athena used it to ward off enemies and protect the innocent, turning the Gorgon's tragic legacy into a force for good. Medusa's story, marked by her transformation from a revered priestess to a monstrous figure and then to a powerful artifact, left a lasting impression on the mythological world. Her life and death became a cautionary tale, a reminder of the capricious nature of the gods and the consequences of their actions. The myth of Medusa, her head, and the battles fought in her name became a part of the larger tapestry of ancient stories, reflecting themes of beauty, power, and the harsh realities of divine justice. Perseus's return and the subsequent use of Medusa's head transformed a tragic personal victory into a mythological milestone. The hero who had faced the Gorgon and emerged victorious was now a part of a broader narrative, his actions reverberating through the myths and legends of his time. Medusa's legacy, while born of pain and suffering, became intertwined with the stories of gods and heroes, leaving an indelible mark on the mythological world. Medusa's story has endured through the ages, evolving from a tale of ancient mythology into a symbol of complex themes in modern times. What once was a narrative of a monstrous figure, feared for her deadly gaze, has become a powerful reflection on suffering, injustice, and transformation. In ancient times, Medusa was viewed as a terrifying creature, a cautionary figure whose gaze could turn anyone to stone. Her legacy was tied to her role as a monster to be defeated, her story a part of the heroic tradition where she was vanquished by Perseus. This perspective painted Medusa as a mere obstacle in the hero's journey, a fearsome being whose life and pain were overshadowed by her monstrous nature. However, in modern interpretations, Medusa's story has been re-examined and reshaped. No longer seen solely as a villain, she is often depicted as a tragic figure, a victim of divine retribution and human cruelty. Her transformation from a beautiful priestess into a Gorgon is now viewed through a lens of sympathy and understanding. The curse that befell her is seen not just as a punishment, but as a reflection of the broader themes of victimization and injustice. Medusa's tale resonates deeply in today's world, where her story is often interpreted as a metaphor for the suffering inflicted upon those who are wronged and powerless. Her transformation, once a mark of her monstrous nature, is now viewed as a symbol of the ways in which trauma and abuse can distort and damage an individual. The beauty she once possessed is overshadowed by the pain and isolation of her cursed existence, making her a figure of empathy rather than just fear. The modern perspective on Medusa also highlights the consequences of betrayal and the harsh judgments passed by those in power. Her story reflects the consequences of divine and human actions, showcasing how victimization can lead to monstrous outcomes. It serves as a poignant reminder of the impact of cruelty and injustice, and the way in which individuals can be transformed by the harshness of their circumstances. In literature, art, and popular culture, Medusa's image has been transformed into one of resilience and defiance. Artists and writers have reimagined her not only as a symbol of fear, but also as a figure of strength. Her monstrous form is now often seen as a protective barrier against those who have wronged her, a way of reclaiming power from those who would seek to demean or harm her. Medusa's legacy extends beyond her role in ancient myths, touching on themes that are deeply relevant today. Her story prompts reflection on the ways we view and treat those who are different or who have been wronged. It challenges us to consider the human stories behind the monstrous facades and to recognize the pain that can transform into fearsome strength. Through this modern lens, Medusa becomes a powerful emblem of the complexity of human experience. Her story, once a mere mythological account of a hero's victory, now carries deeper meanings and lessons. It speaks to the heart of human suffering, the consequences of divine and mortal actions, and the enduring strength found in the face of profound adversity. Medusa's tale, with its evolution from a feared monster to a symbol of tragic resilience, continues to captivate and inspire. Her legacy endures not just as a part of ancient mythology but as a poignant reflection on the human condition, offering valuable lessons and insights that resonate through time.